All right, Philip, thank you for coming on the show. So I know we've had an ecosystem of friends for a while and we've subtly crossed paths, but it's good to finally have a conversation with you.
Same. I'm stoked. I can't wait to
Yeah,
see what comes of it.
same here. Lots of cool stuff to jump into. Okay, so here's the formal intro, Philip. Philip Lanos is a versatile creator and experienced podcast host with a background in business consulting, content creation, and the arts. He's known for his roles as the former host of Action and Ambition with Andrew Metal, which was featured in Entrepreneur Magazine, and Business Brainstorm in Inc. magazine. Philip brings a wealth of experience and sparking insightful conversations with leaders and innovators. He also hosted the War Room Roundtable for the Strategic Advisor Board, and I just spoke to James, which is great. And the Grit Daily Startup Show, where he explored the journeys of entrepreneurs and founders. Currently, he hosts his own podcast, the Phillip Lanos Podcast, and continues to inspire others with his blend of empathy, creativity, and deep industry insights. Philip's mission is to make life simpler and foster creativity, drawing from his diverse background in martial arts, music, and technology. Philip, what's up, brother?
Man, I'm stoked. You know,
Yeah.
things like that always make me feel like I have to live up to something.
Yeah, you got a long intro full of, and I love that diversity. Like you worked in music, you worked in tech, and these are often mutually exclusive spaces. So to have someone traverse both of these gives kind of compounds that uniqueness factor and gives you a certain sense of insight that you might have that other people might not. So that puts you in a great position. And there's something that I found really interesting, even just by going through your intro. You mentioned that you have a focus on making life simpler for others. We all do to some capacity, but I love how that's at the forefront of your consciousness. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I find that because I'm lazy, I'm always looking for a simple way to do things. Now, when I say simple, it's more like I want to make sense of things for people. So there are things that can be complicated rather quickly. And it's not that I seek to simplify for the sake of simplification, so much as I seek to make sense of things as much as possible. And sort of like a tree creating oxygen, wherever I go, whether it's with friends, family, people I work with, I'm constantly trying to design the fastest way between 2 points, from point A to point Z, in terms of what people are trying to accomplish. So there's an optimization of sorts that takes place with me whenever I'm around. It's just who I am, it's
Hmm.
how I am, and that's why I bring that up.
You're lazy but efficient. I love it. You're
Yeah,
pragmatic. So
you
it
gotta know
sounds like,
yourself, you know?
yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. So, and how does that translate into your internal day to day? So, are you constantly like looking at yourself in the mirror saying, "Hey, how can I optimize my lifestyle? How do I get to the end game as
So
quickly as
it's
possible?"
not day to day. For me, every Sunday I take time to sit down and reflect on a relationship in my life. Generally speaking, what I'm feeling, where I'm trying to go, checking in with myself, things of that nature. I can't do day to day because one of my own weaknesses, I'll say, is routine. I almost can't breathe if I'm stuck in a routine. Ironically, that is a routine in and of itself, right? So how does one get out of that? I try to do what I must, and whenever I can, I also try to pay attention to how I'm feeling and what's calling me. Some may say that's the creative part of me, and then there's the other side of me that knows there are things that I need to be doing, but I don't ever want to do things because I need to do them. So I'm trying to find
Right.
a way to constantly push myself to feel inspired to do something so that I can do my best work regardless of what I'm
Right.
doing.
Right. It sounds like there's a lack of complacency there. You wake up in the morning, you wake up for too many mornings and you're doing the same thing. That puts you a little uneasy. And it's kind of why you have such a long intro, because I feel like you get bored a little quickly and you need to constantly be stimulated to stay alive. It's kind of like a gift and a curse because, you know, you never stay in one space for too long, but you also get a certain sense of wisdom when you engross yourself in a very narrow lane for an extended period of time. And it's kind of a science and also an art to know when to juggle between the two. But I get that feeling from you the moment I talked to you and the moment I read your bio. So, how did it all start out? Were you always? And by the way, there's so much I want to talk about your podcasting. But before that, I mean, where did it all start? Did you have like a corporate setting? Were you like fuck college? I mean, how did it go for you?
No, honestly, these are all survival mechanisms. I say that because I have not had a corporate setting. Most of what I've done has been happenstance. I happen to meet someone. I happen to try a thing. I happen to fail at a thing, which forced me to do this. And college in particular, I wanted to go to college. I wanted to be a teacher, plain and simple. And I remember in high school, I got to have lunch with one of the teachers I trusted most as I was about to graduate. They wanted to check in with me. They knew about me. They knew that I worked really hard even just to get to school on a regular basis without going too far into the past, right?
Where'd
Point
you grow up,
being,
by the way?
all over. I've kind of moved around once a year pretty much all of my childhood except for at the age of 14, things started to cement a little. Kind of growing up without parents will make that happen. You know, people passing you around, things of that nature.
Wow.
So you can see just from that, it's sort of like because I was constantly moving around, constantly having to reevaluate my surroundings, constantly having to rekindle, uh, not rekindle, but develop new relationships, not only to myself and others, the environment, you just start to see sort of the nucleus of maybe where and why I am.
Yes, exactly. That was forged very early on, where you were
Yeah,
constantly.
coming back to finish my point though, my trusted teacher told me when he asked me what I want to do in my life, I said I want to be a teacher, just like you. He said, "You want to try something else." He said, "I would never be that irresponsible with your life. There is a lot going on with teachers." As one of the youngest teachers who then became principal shortly after that of that high school, he said, "I got to tell you, you could do it easily, but I think you could also stand to do a lot more so that you don't suffer with lack of money." It still happened to me anyways by choosing other things, but I appreciate that. And then not having parents made it hard to file for some sort of education support, you know, grants and things of that nature. Because in order to file separately to get financial aid, you have to be 24 and older. So I paid for a few classes myself, like linguistic anthropology, things. I was interested in theater, obviously, philosophy, business law. I took a few classes and then I said, yeah, this isn't for me. Not if I'm going to pay for it, you know, personally, because I walk into a class and the teacher goes, get it from somebody else because they don't pay me enough
Right.
to teach twice.
And you're
You know?
resourceful at your core, so you realize right away you have a world of information at your fingertips. There's no reason for you to give up so much money for
Yeah. I
information that
was
you
also
can get
convinced
elsewhere.
I was going to be famous. You know, there was a little bit of arrogance. I'm not going to lie. I wanted to be a singer, an entertainer,
Philip,
and
you
that didn't
are,
work
but
out. But you know,
wait, no, I know that's not true. You're still on your path. And if I had to
right?
ask, if I had to judge you for just a second, I would say the goals you had, like even just a year ago, are stuff that you're happy to have accomplished today. And I feel like your mind is always racing. So the goals you have today are going to be very different than the goals you have tomorrow.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
Do you have ADD?
You know what's funny is I've been talking a lot more about this lately. I believe that I do, but I also do not believe in self-diagnosing. You
No.
know,
Right.
I try to steer clear of that. I've tried things like Adderall and modafinil. Friends have given me here and there. I would say, of course, it did help. It made a difference, but that's what drugs do. They immediately change your
Right.
chemistry. So that's kind of
Right.
like a false positive.
And it's a gradation. We
Yeah,
all have ADD to some extent.
yeah. I do think that I might have it though, if I'm being frank.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. So, and you mentioned you like philosophy. So, what, is there like an underlying philosophy that you subscribe to, especially when like life gets difficult?
Yeah, you know, I tried to look into like Heidegger, if I'm saying that correctly. You
Okay.
know, I tried to look into Nietzsche. I tried to look at Stoicism and all the greats that are
There
in
we
there.
go.
You know, and
Marcus Aurelius.
Aristotle. Yeah, yeah, Marcus Aurelius and Plato. I looked at all of that stuff. I was really, really into it because it wasn't just philosophy. I was fortunate in high school to take comparative religions with a teacher named Richard Takagaki, who was pretty notorious for enmeshing himself in a lot of religions, you know. I've been fortunate enough to grow up around a lot of friends with different backgrounds. You know, a lot of my mentors happen to be Jewish, you know, and so I got to learn a lot from a lot of different people. And as you know, me adapting so many times over the years, I really came to appreciate different religions and looking for truth. Right. And I found honestly, some of the simpler things are just, you don't need to answer the question, you know, if there is a God, how should I behave, and all these profundities, when the reality is, what if tomorrow is the best of your life? Like, if today is terrible, what if tomorrow, literally starting tomorrow, is going to be the best? What if? You can't prove that it's not going to be, just like you can't prove that it isn't or that it is, right? So, just a degree of optimism goes a long way. I think everything else starts to get like, you know, you talk about nihilism, and I mean, I we're opening a can of worms here, and philosophy could get really
Yeah.
deep. But
No,
suffice it to
I'm all
say,
in.
I've looked at a lot of it, and I found that it's a quick path to depression if you're not careful when you begin to question everything, because everything can be questioned and everything should
Correct.
be examined at some
Yeah.
point. You should practice examination of life and the life that you're living and the life that others are living. Wholeheartedly agree to that. But like all things, the pendulum swings. And after a certain point, you should come back to center and go explore something else, so that you find that the truth is usually somewhere in the middle between what you thought was wrong, what you thought was right. And
Right.
we're not really sure what that is, you know, but every
Right.
individual has the choice to make their version of that. That's to make it really simple without trying to overcomplicate and call on
No,
quotes and
no,
such.
I totally feel you. And I think it's that, we shouldn't have that binary mindset where it's like either one religion is entirely right or one religion is entirely wrong. And to speak about Jewish philosophy for just a moment, in Hebrew it goes, "Ezehu chacham halumed mikol adam." So, who is a wise person? It's one who can learn from anyone. And I think all of these religions have something to teach you that can make the most of your life. You don't need to get too caught up in any of them. And every philosophy, whether it be nihilism or stoicism, has something for you to equip yourself with to better your life. But I love that you mentioned stoicism, because I'm in particular a pretty big fan of stoicism. I think our energy is so limited, and we should focus on things that actually do matter and things that we actually can control, and learn to be at peace with everything else. So that's kind of an underlying philosophy that I'm trying to live my life by. But yeah, that's all fascinating stuff. Now, I
It's a
kind of want
good
to,
one.
yeah, yeah, it is.
Kitsati frit ani mevin. You know, I know a little. Only because at some point I had started exploring, you know, metaphysical things, and it led me to the Kabbalah, you know, for a little bit.
So I grew up very Jewish, and we never, ever, ever learned Kabbalah. We don't even talk about it.
I understand that it's actually a
Yeah,
metaphysical, esoteric
right.
practice. Yeah,
And in fact, many times we're told we're not supposed to learn it, not
until you're
because,
like 30. Yeah,
right. Well, it's not because it's a waste of time and you're not going to understand it. There's nothing wrong with that. The issue is that you think you might understand it, and you might read it and you might take a simple interpretation and not be capable of understanding the true depth, and you're going to start applying kind of incorrect philosophies, thinking that they're coming from a good source. So that's just a little one piece there, but
it's fascinating actually.
yeah, yeah, it really is. Um, Kind of want to talk about your podcasting, because first of all, I like that you're on the other end of the spectrum. Is this common where you're being interviewed as opposed to talking to
It's
others?
actually been very rare. I personally,
It's
I
such a
know
good
that the
story.
most, yeah, the
It's a
most
hidden
important
gem.
thing someone can do in podcasting is be a guest. Honestly, more than hosting your own show. I'm just going to lay that out there for anybody, right? Hosting your own show, you just better hope that you have a platform for whatever it is that matters to you. But if you really want to grow as a podcaster, you have to be guesting, and I don't do that enough at all. It's just I don't know why. I'm so used to being on the other side of things and being curious. I don't know how to be seen as something that is curious to witness, you know. And so I'm working on that. Anyways, I don't want to interrupt what you're thinking.
No, no. I mean, so the next time I ask you to come on, you shouldn't say no. So I've been
Yeah, no,
thinking to
I'd be
ask you
happy
all the
to. Are you
time. You're
kidding
gonna
me?
come every week. and you're gonna make you the best guest ever. Yeah. So yeah, jumping onto the thought of all these people you've interviewed. So you you were a podcast host for for top podcasts for Action and Ambition on Entrepreneur. That's a huge podcast. You worked with Jordan on Grid Daily. That's awesome. And Inc. Magazine. That's super cool as well. And I imagine you're constantly just getting bombarded with high functioning individuals, people doing unique work, and you only have a short time frame to talk to them where you try to stick to what's important. So you're getting high level knowledge, I guess, in a very quick and just constantly just like at you. And I wonder, like, have you found from all the people you've interviewed, have you found like these unique or perspectives that constantly crop up as a common denominator, or do you find success really has just such a wide varying degrees of personal philosophies and behaviors?
I mean, it's definitely true that there are commonalities. These people tend to high performing individuals that I've come across who are raising capital or innovating or leading large teams. They do tend to be, suffice it to say, even the people who aren't outgoing have a degree of authority about themselves and how they carry themselves. They take themselves seriously. And I don't mean that where they're rude or mean, but they take what they're doing to matter. There's no degree of uncertainty, at least not when they presented themselves to me, that what they're doing doesn't seem to matter to something. To some degree, sometimes it skews too far in the other direction, sure, but never in the doesn't matter why am I here, right? So it's important to be able to, like, if that's a path you want to go, you have to have that clarity.
Right.
Someone that I speak with these days, I haven't been able to speak to him a lot. But like for example, someone I speak to a lot named Joe Applebaum. One of the things he always tries to remind me of when I get confused is he says, clarity equals confidence equals execution. Right? You're not executing because you aren't confident, and you aren't confident because you don't have clarity. And so tying back to your question, a lot of these people who have either worked in venture firms to seed growth of companies, or people who have launched a company and are trying to figure out how to break into the market with a go to market strategy, or whether it's software that was developed specifically to solve enterprise level problems. All of these people are open minded and absolutely assertive where they think it matters most for them. Now, that may not be clear, but I'll say this one last thing on it, right? I think I found that across the board, one thing is for sure. Those who are successful know how to explain the thinking behind their decisions. So it's not a unilateral decision across the board and then everyone else has to figure out what's going on in the team. They tend to take the time to explain what they're about to make a choice for to their teams when the teams are smaller. I've also been told by those who have grown and exited that because the team that you start with from 1 to 10 isn't the same as 10 to 100 and 100 to 1,000, right?
Right.
At some point, you're no longer able to share that level of thinking because legal and compliance gets involved. What are you going to do? You do your best
Right.
to hopefully inspire that culture of that transparency without getting in the way of compliance and other things that may make that a little more difficult. It's just the
Right.
nature of the beast.
Right. Scalability is so interesting because the tools and the insight and the depth you need to get from, let's just say, from 0 to 10 employees or from to your first million is radically different than once you make 1 million, the tools and skills you need are radically different to make 10 million and scale upwards. Yeah, I've always found that quite interesting. I has anyone ever said anything to you in a podcast that really that hit you deep and you're like, wow, this is beautiful. This is the kind of philosophy I want to take with me. Like something that you just was a curveball, you didn't expect it, and anything you can think back of?
Yeah, there's been a few moments. There was a time when someone told me the best business decision they ever made was the person they chose to marry. And that same person also said that the way they saved their marriage was that they made it absolutely mandatory. They didn't get married, have kids, and then suddenly say, okay, well, we'll wait till the kids are older and then we'll rekindle our relationship. They made their relationship a priority. They also talked about, somebody else also mentioned the best decision they ever made was distinctly saying what their lane is going to be and then letting their business partner also establish what their lane is going to be and staying out of each other's way. That was also a very important thing that I thought was relevant as far as like impacting me emotionally. I've had people get emotional as they're telling their stories, but I try myself never to take on people's, because I don't want to sound like those people who say I'm an empath. But I do try to extend empathy when I'm listening to someone speak. But I let them have their moments. It's at least the way I interview. It's that way. But I will say that there have been conversations I've heard where people have been sitting in the CEO seat and they're thinking they're doing everything necessary. They're delegating to their accountant and the rest of the team what needs to happen for the company to grow, only for them to find out later that their accountant was essentially taking out loans on behalf of the entire company and never letting the CEO know, only to find out that all the money they had raised and everything else was used improperly. They took out loans, and now they're actually in big trouble because of the way everything was managed. And all because they got so caught up with trying to be the awesome CEO that I'm going to let everything go the way that very loose, and I'm going to focus on what I need to do and to let the rest of my team handle it. And only to find these number of betrayals that I've heard in these stories of people having to build from scratch again is crazy to me. Like, it's actually very common. You almost haven't become a full-fledged CEO. I'm not saying this for fact, just as a figure of speech, that you almost can't become a full-fledged CEO without experiencing some of those difficulties between legal issues and accounting
Right.
issues that damn near bankrupt you. And that's why I have so much respect for the people I've interviewed, because so many of them take on things that honestly can be lonely. There's probably nothing lonelier than being an entrepreneur. And I'm not trying to woe is me for entrepreneurs, but you really take on a lot more than you think you do. And I think the ones that succeed really are the ones that aren't smart enough to realize that they were never going to make it, and that's why they make it. Because if you take a hard look, CEOs and business owners often hire people who are way smarter than them, right? That's smart business. They also never pay them more than they absolutely have to, because that's also smart business, right? But the point is that they're not afraid, the ones who succeed, of being surrounded by people who are smarter than them. That's why they get further ahead.
Hmm.
And that's also what allows them to then have these reality blinders, because they can't see, often they don't see that like these people are smarter, or I'm not smart enough to this. They just
Right.
they just keep moving forward. And so, without belaboring the point too much further,
Yeah.
I
There's
think
a
it's
certain
important to have a high degree of self-respect, but also tenacity.
right. There's a certain degree of stubbornness and grit
Yeah,
because you have to be really able to weather a storm for an extended period of time, especially for the big successes. They don't come for years, and you got to keep honing away at this specific craft and be confident that it's all going to pull through. So that I find interesting. Now,
it's almost
just to,
crazy, right? It's almost crazy.
right, and a lot of times you look back, you're like, hey, it wasn't, to many people, some of these transactions are not entirely worth it, and it's a few people who are willing to do that for quite a while that actually pull through. But yeah, I do agree. Now, I kind of want to push this a little. When I was reading through your intro, again, I mentioned you saw that you did martial arts, you did art, and you did tech. How do you feel? I guess tell me a little bit about your background in martial arts. Let's start there.
Sure. I think that number one, my father always, when I did get the chance to spend a little bit of time with him up until maybe the age of 7, before he was hit with ALS, like full blown, and then that was like a whole nother story. But he was a construction worker. He liked martial arts. We would watch Bruce Lee movies together, and so that was always a part of my life in general, right? That getting fit and nunchucks were in the house. I would get in trouble whenever I grabbed them, that kind of thing. And then over the years, I found myself often being in situations I didn't like, mostly because of the people I was hanging out with who would then look for problems. It was never me. I'm
Right.
pretty laid back. I think most things are not worth fighting over. You know what I mean? Just generally speaking, life's too short to be that upset about every other little thing. Especially rude people. They do it to themselves. Good luck. You'll be alone when you're older. You know, that's the way I see it.
I agree.
But I remember there was a wedding in particular that I attended for a family member, and I'm never afraid of myself getting hurt or sticking up for myself. But protecting the people around me is a whole other thing. Some people take it the further extreme. I don't have anything against guns. I haven't had much training in them, so I always get uncomfortable when someone pulls one out for no reason, like unwarranted, just like, oh, you want to see the gun? you know, I always feel a little like, what is the point of this? Especially because I don't
Yeah, I
trust
think
the
we all
person who
do.
pulled it out. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Yeah. um, but in particular at that wedding, there were a lot of people I cared about, and it just so happened these families were joining forces. One family and the other. I was part of one of them, and they got drunk. And this is another reason why I don't drink or smoke. I know I have problems. It's other people that seem to forget they have problems too.
Right.
And they become liabilities, and somebody said one thing or another. And I started to realize that even if I'm okay, or I can figure out some way to survive this, I don't know how I feel about the fact that I lack the confidence to be able to protect the people around me. So that's really what spurred me to finally go and put my money where my mouth was and go look for an instructor. And I know that it's looked down upon in the martial arts world to take Wing Chun, but that's really the nucleus of where things started. Right? I found an instructor who happened to be teaching at UCLA here in Los Angeles, and that led me to then also look into boxing, led me to look into Krav Maga, and it really just opened up a world for me of understanding mechanics. I understand there are a lot of other arts. I don't want to make this, a push-up contest for who can do more and who's better. I understand that there are mechanics involved. You want ground work, and you want some footwork when you're standing and moving, and you want some conditioning. Those are the fundamentals. That's how I understand it, and that's where it lives for me.
Isn't it?
One sec, sorry, it sounds really hard to hear you, actually.
Does it?
Just to control audio, I want to make sure you get good audio. For a second there, it sounded really muffled.
Does it still sound muffled?
Oh, there you go. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so my question here is, do you feel that same relationship you had with your friends and the need to protect them, that camaraderie, do you feel like that translates to how you behave in business at all?
I mean, to all things, right? Not even just business, but everything. I tend to, the minute I realize that something is required, that something is necessary, I do everything I can to fulfill that obligation for that necessity and that requirement to any degree of proficiency that will pass the baseline of what that means. And then after that, it's here or there, depending on my circumstances, whether I'll take it further, if that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. It does. Now, jumping onto music really quickly. First of all, what kind of music do you play? I think you're a singer, right? I think I
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I play a little guitar, but I would never gloat about it, and probably outside of this podcast, would never tell anyone
why? It's really good.
because I got a long way to go.
Well, I mean, yeah, that's how it is with everything. But how do you feel like that mix of music, martial arts, and the technical aspect? How do you feel like that gives you some sort of uniqueness, or does it?
you know, funny thing about me, and I always run into counter comments when I say this, but I try to live my life as though I am the rule and not the exception. And I find that because I live that way, and I do it full force and just try my best, that people tend to comment the opposite. They're like, definitely not the rule. But I try to stay that way, not to stay humble, more or less, but to always put myself in a position to know I can learn more. Right? I found that the people that I've been a part of conversations where I'll join and I'd speak or say something or do something, play some music or whatever the case may be, and those who are focused on being exceptional tend to take it almost as an affront to their very existence. And I understand that ego has a lot to do with it, and so I do my best. The beauty about being in music, everyone gets to play a solo. And in order to make beautiful music, when you're collaborating, you have to let the others play their instrument as loud as they can. I don't see it as a challenge to my existence. I see it as an added color to the overall tapestry or painting that we're creating. And I find that because of my mentality of trying to be the rule and not the exception, that it puts me in a position to be more collaborative. I try to. One of my favorite authors is Alfred Adler, who was a contemporary of Sigmund Freud. And one of the things he was working on, even though he was equally as amazing as Sigmund Freud, he didn't systematize anything. It was very loose what he believed, and I try to steer clear of superiority complexes and inferiority complex. Very hard to do, obviously. It's very much like the Mahayana Buddhism. There's this middle path that you have to walk, and even the walk can be a meditation and all these things. I try to just be as present as possible and as chill as possible about circumstances, especially because I have a temper. I do, and I try to check that.
Right. And it's good you're conscious of it. And if you can take a time machine and go back and speak to your former self, what advice would you give him?
What's funny is I wrote the whole reason I even wrote a book. I didn't even put that in yeah, and anything that I rarely promote this, and I'm not promoting it. Nobody needs to go buy it. I'm just saying
Tell us
I
about it.
made a mission. I made it a mission in my life to write a book because everyone told me I should have because of my story, whatever that may mean, right? And I grew up reading like Tony Robbins, every self-help book you can possibly think of, all because I wanted to make up for the fact that I didn't have parents, I didn't have guidance, I didn't have resources, I didn't have opportunities, I didn't have anything. All I was handed were obstacles. I think the only blessing in my life was that I wasn't also born in a country that was experiencing, you know, starvation and warfare and whatever. Like at least I was spared from that. But a
Yeah.
lot of domestic growth, it was just abysmal. And I'm one of 18 kids, and so when you
Wait,
ask me
what?
what would I say to, yeah, I'm one of 18 siblings. My father
Oh,
had a
you're one
family
of
before me, and then
18
another
siblings.
family. My mother tried to find love in many places to no avail, and so it left a lot of us kind of to fend for ourselves. I have one older sister, otherwise I'm the oldest male. And so, you try to figure life out without guidance, and you look to the wrong people for friends, you look to the wrong people for mentors. You make all the wrong choices really early. You feel the anger all of your life until one day you get so angry that you realize it's not worth being angry anymore. You get lucky and you read books, and then you start to discover that there's a way to see the world differently. You don't have to be who you think you are. You can always change who you are, you know? And so I got lucky in that way. So I wrote a book as a love note to anyone who wants to cut that learning curve in half. I don't know if I successfully accomplished that goal. Most of the people who bought it were my friends and family, like roughly 50 copies or so.
What's the name of
I
the book?
can't say pushing past the norm, sidestepping the mind game of life. It's honestly probably hard to find on Amazon because it hasn't sold a lot of copies, but it's on there. And it was my bucket list item. I said I'm going to do it because everybody always tells me.
Yeah,
So in
and the book can be more for
2019,
you, so you can
yeah,
organize your thoughts and put them down
that's really what it
coherently.
was. Like I for sure rewrite it for sure, but it was a bucket list. I did it and I published it and I said done.
Good for
I
you.
got it done.
That's awesome.
You know.
Yeah.
So yeah, suffice it to say, the one thing that came out of that was, I think most important, that the Buddhists talk about like non-attachment a lot, and I think that often, just like people can be very angry, I also feel that nihilism, too much of a degree of non-attachment also makes it seem like nothing should matter at all. And really, I think, again, this middle sense that we've been talking
Right.
about, right? There's a bunch of anecdotes that I tried to use my personal stories to prove a point instead of just blatantly giving advice.
Right.
But I tried to cover, young love. I tried to cover work ethic. I tried to cover things that I struggled with. I remember hating the fact I was like, wait, so now we just need to work like forever? Like that's just life? Like, things that kids come to realize at a certain point, and I try to prepare them for all that insofar as I possibly can.
Cool stuff. Now, for those who want to take a path similar to yours, what advice would you give to them?
Similar to mine in the sense of like podcasting or
Correct.
just in general being open to everything.
Well, you do a few things. So you do podcasting, you do consulting. Um, but I guess to be a little more broadly speaking, someone who wants to take a path that's kind of void of the 9 to 5, and it might not necessarily have to be podcasting, it might not necessarily have to be consulting, but to pretty much live life on your own terms and not work within the corporate system.
Right. Now, keep in mind, I didn't do this by choice. They just wouldn't hire me because I don't have a college degree, I don't have the network, etc. I've tried to apply for years and never worked out. So I had to find other ways, right? So
Are you happy it
I
played out
done,
that way?
yeah. I mean, I can't complain. I'm not going to say I don't know what the other side holds, but I'll say that I'm certainly happy that everything happened the way that it did, including my challenges so far, because I also would not be as scrappy, as I am now. So
Resourceful, quick-witted,
yeah,
living life at the
yeah,
moment.
you definitely pick up some life skills by choosing to go this path. But I'll tell you this much. I remember I was going to get promoted at a marketing agency in New York City when I was living there. And everything was going great. I became the problem solver at the company. When they would do one-to-ones, while they're asking everyone else, why did this go this way? Why are you talking to the client this way? They were asking me things like, if you were CEO, what would you be doing? Those were, and I only knew that because I would ask my colleagues, my coworkers, what do they talk about on your one-on-ones? And they were night and day from the things that were happening with me. So when the company told me in confidence they wanted to promote me, give me a raise in salary, I started asking myself, if they're willing to pay me that much money, maybe I'm worth something, and maybe I got something here. So
It took someone
I
else
polite,
to see that for you to realize,
yeah,
which is interesting.
yeah. So I politely turned them down. I told them how much they meant to me. They were like my family in New York. They really were. It was a scrappy digital marketing agency, and they knew their stuff. I had come in when they had just downsized from like 200 employees to 15 top tier employees, raised their rates to 10K a month. I mean, like they were killing it, right? And I got to be part of that growth and watch that happen. And so when they did that, I made the choice, whatever, and I moved back to LA after that. And man, I don't know if it was the right decision. I turned away a lot of money, and to then be left penniless. I was living in an office for a while. I'm not gonna lie. There was a time where I looked at the bank account. It was like negative dollars, and I was like, "Oh my goodness, what am I gonna do? How am I gonna eat?" I started eating one slice of pizza on a credit card. At Whole Foods. I was like, How am I gonna do this?" I was
Those
showering
are
at the
those are
gym.
sometimes the best times. They
Yeah,
they they spawn the greatest depth of wisdom, life lessons
it
that you
was
take with
hard
you.
to it was
Yeah,
hard to get past the idea of not earning by the hour and instead earning by your output and by the value that you're contributing to someone. And I thought that I could just take what I had learned about the origins of podcasting somewhere in like 2013, 14, and launch a business on that. Not understanding that before you can launch a business, you have to understand your product and service. You have to understand the market rate so you can competitively price yourself. You have to understand whether or not people are willing to pay for it, even if there is a market rate for it. Is the market big enough that you can actually get a sizable business from it? And then you have to understand how to navigate a sales call and realize it's not about you. You actually have to inquire what the problem is that they're trying to solve. Someone thinks they want a podcast, and what they actually want is a community. And the list goes on, and you don't need a pod. And so diagnosing a client instead of talking about your product and your service and trying to convince them to buy your stuff, all that were failures. I made one after the other that I only know now. But it
yeah,
took
like
me like 10 plus years to learn that because I'm hard
yeah,
headed.
yeah. Sometimes the nicest thing you can do for someone is not just answer their questions, but make sure they're asking the right questions. Yeah, that's honestly great. Philip, you have a life full of adventure, and and I think you you've probably been through more than most people have, and I'm happy to see you to be such a wonderful person, and you're so fun to collaborate with and speak with, and I hear such good things about you. So keep up being awesome, and thank you for sharing your wisdom.